AM960 KLTF Little Falls, and with that theme, it is today's Upfront program. And like last Tuesday, a special program we have in store for you here today. We have a debate/forum with our State Senate District 9 candidates, both joining us via the phone here this morning. John Peters, the DFL candidate, and the Republican candidate, Incumbent Senator Paul Gazelka, both joining us via the phones. We're going to start off with the opening statements, which we decided with a coin flip the order, and we will begin with the opening statements from John Peters first. This is the State Senate District 9 candidate debate/forum. We begin with our opening statements. John Peters. John?
Well, good morning. I hope everybody's enjoying our summer weather out there. By the way, I run a small computer shop in Long Prairie, educating seniors and doing computer repair. I'm married to a nurse, Kathleen Peters, and we live on Horseshoe Lake near Browardville. Together we have 6 children and 8 grandchildren. In college, I majored in football, girls, and beer, not necessarily in that order. But I still managed to graduate with degrees in mathematics and education, minors in physics, philosophy, and coaching. I'll talk about the policies during the question and answer period. This election has taught me a lot about myself from other people. I have been called a communist, a fascist, and a baby killer. I am not a communist, a fascist, or a baby killer. I am a Democrat and proud of it. I'm proud to be a patriotic American, and I love Minnesota. I know that Senator Gazelka is the same. We both want to improve the lives of our citizens and help the USA to become the best it can be. We just believe in different ways to achieve these goals. I have also been called a libtard. I do not exactly know what that means, but I assume it's a derogatory term related to a cognitive problem. I will take that as an item of personal pride, so call me a libtard if all you want. It's a badge of honor. Thank you.
Those are the opening statements from DFL candidate, District 9 State Senate seat, John Peters. And now the opening comments from incumbent Republican Senator Paul Gazelka. Paul?
Well, good morning, everyone. And first of all, it's been a real privilege to serve you, and then to be the leader of the Senate for the last 4 years has been an amazing honor. I want to focus on the last 4 years in my opening statement to say, what did we fight for? And I want to say we preserved funding to fix Minnesota's roads and bridges. We did that without a gas tax increase that the governor wanted. We reduced the cost of prescription drugs and health care. We tackled the Minnesota opioid crisis, and frankly, Little Falls and St. Gabriel were a big part of that. We directed funding to Minnesota's small towns and cities for road improvements. We protected Minnesota's seniors and vulnerable population. There needed to be more laws to make sure they weren't taken advantage of. We fought to preserve religious liberty and preserve the sanctity of life. We supported investments in agriculture and fought for farmers, among many things. But also, what did we stop? Because these were some of the things that the Democrat governor and leadership wanted to do. We stopped the 20-cent gallon gas tax and billions of other dollars of tax increases, cab fees, auto sale tax increases, and more. We stopped cruel funding cuts to nursing homes. That was the one thing they wanted to cut. We stopped the governor from making Minnesota a sanctuary state. We stopped his government-run health care or single-payer health care called OneCare. We stopped infanticide and post-birth abortion laws. I can't even believe that was a discussion. We stopped full legalization of marijuana in Minnesota. We support medical marijuana, not recreational. And we stopped all extreme anti-gun laws protecting the Second Amendment. So that's the past. The questions today will talk about the future, but I wanted you to know that we have fought for central Minnesota.
Those are the opening statements from a Senate candidate, the incumbent on the Republican side, Paul Gazelka. We will alternate who answers questions first. So this first one will first be responded to by Paul Gazelka, and then followed that John Peters. We begin with COVID-19. It has largely impacted our society. One of the impacts has been the restrictions on group gatherings, including on capacities allowed at area businesses, for example, fitness centers, bars, restaurants, and others. As a potential voice for Central Minnesota in the state Senate, What restrictive measures would you support right now and moving forward? Because we've learned more about the virus in the past several months, it may also help if you review how your viewpoint has changed, if at all, as we learned more about the virus. First to answer this question, Republican Paul Gazelka. Paul?
Well, thank you. And first of all, I always say that COVID-19 is serious. It's a pandemic. It's a virus that we need to pay attention to and follow the guidelines of washing hands, covering your cough, stay home if you're sick, etc. But I part ways with the governor and the Democrats when they want to shut everything down. I think that's been a huge mistake. Yesterday, I did a press conference with Kurt Dowd of the House to say we have a contract to open up Minnesota. If we win the House back and keep the Senate, we'll remove the governor's emergency powers. It's his emergency powers that have decided by himself to shut down businesses, to shut down churches, and now shutting down schools. So in many schools across Minnesota, kids are not able to be in the classroom because of the metrics that the governor has laid out. And so they're not getting in-classroom curriculum, and many kids need that to succeed. And so we will fight to open up those things. We just feel like it's very, very important. It's not that the virus isn't serious, but what we've done to react to it has been a mistake. For example, New York just put out a report of over 10,000 people that were tested in schools, students and faculty, 10,000, and only 13 faculty were tested with COVID, only 5 kids tested and had it. That doesn't mean they died, they just had it. And in Minnesota, I think it's one person under age 20 has died of COVID, and yet we're willing to sacrifice their future. And we just stand against that. We have to figure out how to live our lives, knowing that this is a serious virus, but choosing to live our life safely through it.
These are the comments of Republican Paul Gazelka, State Senate District 9 debate/forum here today. Now the response to the same question towards John Peters on the DFL side. John, dealing with COVID-19, in particular, the restrictions on businesses, what did you support or would you support moving forward, and has your views changed on this subject at all? The response for this question, John Peters. John?
Well, first of all, this is a very emotional subject for me since I lost the month of June and part of May with COVID. One day my wife thought I was going to have to go to the hospital and that she would never see me again. So everything that I say is streamed on that. I agree with Paul, which I probably would have disagreed with before, that for primary school children in school, it's probably fairly safe on there. The only trouble is we're having a big spike right now of COVID stuff. It's a little less. Hybrid is probably the better way to go for high school and possibly college. Now, here's a couple things. Wisconsin has now opening, a field hospital to handle the overflow COVID emergencies. Right now, people will say there's not been that many deaths and that we're overblowing the number of deaths that we have. Well, if you look at the numbers of more deaths than we had last year at this time, actually it's in September, there were 230 to 290,000 more people died from February 1st to September 1st than did last year. So, therefore, this is not overblown. But now, in Wisconsin, I was just listening to an epidemiologist. 6% of the people that have COVID have to be hospitalized, and 1% of the people that have COVID die. Now, personally, I think a lot of people are saying those of us that are 65 and older, that we have a right to die, we've done everything. I personally don't believe that. I believe I have a lot to give on there. Now, but if 6% are hospitalized, that means that 6% of the COVID people will have long-term effects. Long-term effects, scarring of the lungs, scarring of the heart, brain inflammation, strokes, heart attacks. So I still have breathing problems from my COVID bout. So if people would wear their stupid masks and socially distance, and I think maybe there's a good chance that people should restrict the amount of time over the holidays because we're going to have a big spike right there. The state of Minnesota said our biggest thing is family get-togethers right now. So I believe that businesses can be open as long as they do stuff, and it would really help if people showed personal responsibility and did what is recommended.
That's the response to the question, John Peters, and we will allow time for rebuttals during each of these questions, too, so I'll ask both if either of you have any rebuttals. First off, on that response, Paul Gazelka, do you have any response for the answer given by John Peters moments ago?
Well, I'm glad it sounds like John's modifying his position a little bit, and I'm glad because we have to learn to function as a society. N1H1 or H1N1 back in the early 2000s, over 477 kids died of that. And I mentioned in Minnesota only one from COVID, and yet they didn't shut down anything. They didn't quarantine the whole population. They just addressed the people that were vulnerable. And for COVID, if you're over 70, particularly over 80, you do need to pay extra attention. And so that is the area that I've always felt like we have to pay the attention. 80% of the deaths, around 80%, are in nursing homes, and so we have to pay attention to what we're doing there. But if we don't have kids in school, if we don't have businesses open, if we don't have churches open, our society is not the same. And you have more mental health problems, suicide problems, many different problems, businesses going out of business. And so we can do it. I am hopeful. I think we know what the virus is now. I believe that we can manage through it. I have a lot of hope and a lot of trust in Minnesotans to live their lives safely.
That's the rebuttal from Paul Gazelka, and now allow one more opportunity, the rebuttal from John Peters on the DFL side. John?
Well, I actually have two items. First of all, H1N1 was diagnosed relatively quickly and killed relatively quickly, so it actually petered itself out, where COVID, you could have it be contagious for 5 days or before you show symptoms, or you may never show symptoms, and you can pass it on to people on there. And again, it's the long-term effects that are going to affect our nation. South Dakota has a positive rate. So you don't count the number you have, you count the positive rate, the percentage. You know, we're looking at 10%. Minnesota went from 4.8 to 5.8% in just the last month because people are not following the rules, and maybe we have too much open on here. So just a quick note, there have been more people killed and from attending church services and funerals than have from all the riots in the country this year.
That's the response from John Peters. And as we move along to our next question, gentlemen, we will first direct this question to John and then have Paul respond. And next up, we'll talk about health care and health insurance coverage, always a major issue to many voters. When it comes to health care, a majority of our audience seems to be most concerned with having the best health care for the lowest cost possible. Pre-existing conditions is also a concern for many. So if elected at the statewide level, what steps would you take to try and achieve this goal for your area constituents? First to respond to this question, DFL candidate John Peters.
Well, again, this is a very personal question for me because this is one of my highest priorities. From 1997 to 2002, I spent 200-plus days in the hospital. I went from being fairly well off to being $200,000 in debt. I'm lucky. I happen to have a skill set that is popular, so I was able to get out of it. Now, because I had pre-existing conditions on that, I could not get affordable health care. It was roughly $1,000 a month, and when you're spending 200 days in the hospital running a business, you're not bringing in much income. And it was a $10,000 deductible. I essentially had to give it up. I closed my business for a while, went down to the Twin Cities to teach college in computer science so I could get insurance. So, that's very personal for me. What I would like to do is somehow expand MNsure and Medicaid. We cannot go to a complete public option because I don't know what we would, because we have to figure out what to do with the vast number of people that are in the insurance agency. Actually, there's probably only one insurance agent that I would like to see lose some income next year of about $45,000 to $60,000, but that's just a personal item there. But we got to figure out what to do with the people that are having. I was also told by an administrator that if the Affordable Care Act is dropped, 60% of their income would go away. If I had 60% of my income go away, I would have to close down. That also means that if we have medical places closing down, people, especially older people, may have to drive 50 to 100 miles to get to a new residence, and we can't allow that to happen. I'm sure Paul agrees that we cannot allow that to happen, and we have both would have to find a way to stop that from happening. Thank you.
That's the response on the healthcare issue from John Peters. A same question directed now towards Paul Gazelka. Paul, on the issue of healthcare, what would you support to try and offer the best service at the lowest cost for area constituents? The response from Republican Paul Gazelka.
Yeah, first of all, I would say the Obamacare affordable health care in Minnesota was called MNsure, and it was a disaster. It cost us over $150 million just to set up a web page for it to work, and Minnesota's health care went down as a result of the Affordable Care Act because we've been leading the way frankly, all the way back to the 70s in Minnesota. We're the ones that said that we're going to make sure that people with pre-existing conditions are always covered in Minnesota. And so anytime I see postcards out there saying Republicans don't want to cover pre-existing conditions, they don't know that in Minnesota we've been doing that since the 1970s. But we'll continue to work on lowering prescription drug prices just like we did insulin. It's about half the price of what it was a year ago. We focus on things called price transparency, which means we want the costs of the medical bills so that people realize how much they're paying. They can shop around. We knew one case where a knee surgery was like $10,000 more in one place versus another, so people can choose. We'll continue to support reinsurance, which basically saved the private insurance market. It allowed health insurance companies to be up into some of the counties in northern Minnesota that they were not even thinking about being, and so we made sure that there was competition everywhere, and we'll do things along those lines and continue to do that. But another thing we did is we delivered landmark new elder care protections to the end abuse in long-term care facilities. So healthcare is complex, it's broad, but we all agree that we have to do the things necessary to drive down the cost of healthcare and make it available for everyone. And so it's not easy, but we've made great strides in the last few years to that end.
And then we will allow rebuttals on both sides. First, a rebuttal opportunity. That the response from Republican Paul Gazelka. On the DFL side, John Peters. John, do you have any rebuttal to add to that?
Well, the startup problems with MNsure I can't argue with. I believe most of those problems have been fixed. Being a tech nerd, I could see the problems happening almost right away because of poor design. And that's one of my strengths if I were elected, is I can tell what's BS and what isn't when it comes to science. But my wife had knee surgery last week. It is expensive. It's hard to get around. I'm not real happy with the insurance policy she has. I'm real happy with my Medicare and my extra insurance. And just a little thing, my daughter had her baby in Australia. She could have had midwife service for free to deliver the baby, but they decided they wanted to choose their hospital. They wanted to choose their stuff. The insurance cost her $49 a month, and then she could choose whatever she wanted to do. Now, their taxes are probably about 20% higher than ours, but for me, if the taxes are 20% higher and my wife's and my insurance went down, I would be having net gain. So out-of-pocket money, it's great. So it's all yours.
That's the rebuttal from John Peters, and one final opportunity on the health care, a question there, a rebuttal from Republican Paul Gazelka. Paul?
Yeah, so this will be an area that we have to continually work on. Part of health care is dealing with the waste, fraud, and abuse within the Department of Health and Human Services. the child care issue, that the abuse of money going out the door there. So there's just so many areas of it we're going to look at. But as a result of the changes that we made the last couple of years, Minnesota, even though our health insurance still is expensive, it's the lowest health insurance premiums in the nation. And I think it's primarily a result of the things that we have been doing the last couple of years. But our work is never done there. This is one of the most expensive parts of most people's budget that they have to work through. And so we'll just continue to work on it, but we have made some good progress.
And that's the response from Paul Gazelka. You are listening to the District 9 State Senate debate/forum with Republican Paul Gazelka and DFL candidate John Peters. Our next question comes from a listener, Nancy, and thank you for passing this along. There was a bonding bill that was passed last week by both the House and State Senate, and the question recaps how would you vote, or how did you vote, and why. Now, for Senate Gazelka, you have the first opportunity to respond to this question. So for yourself, how did you vote and why? And after your response, John, assuming you had a chance to review it since then, did you support this version of the bonding bill, and how would you have voted and why? That's the question from Nancy. First, the response from Senator Paul Gazelka.
So the bonding bill originates in the House. It was passed with the support of 25 Republican senators, and then representatives. And then once it passed, they went sine die, or they were done. And so it came to the Senate. Our choice was either accept it or not accept it. We couldn't modify it, which we probably would have done. But I did support it. I think in the end there was an argument that we should not do a bonding bill until the governor gives up his emergency powers. I never thought that was a good idea. He never did give them up, not in May, June, July, August, September. That was not going to be something that we give up as emergency powers. The only way we can do that is win the House and Senate into Republican hands. Then we'll remove them. But I think people forget that we've been doing bonding bills for infrastructure for generations. In fact, all the way back to the beginning of our Constitution. It's to cover our roads, our wastewater infrastructure. We do a bonding bill instead of the 20-cent gas tax that the governor was proposing last year. And so very important for making sure we maintain our infrastructure. But in addition, there's a provision for farmers and small business owners to conform to the Trump tax cuts, and it was Section 179. That was very important that we get done. In addition to that, we had money that some people said was bailing out Minneapolis, but it wasn't. It was funding the Highway Patrol for their extra costs to make the streets safe in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And I would do that all day long, pay the Highway Patrol to take back the streets. So in the end, bonding bills are never perfect. They take 60%, which means you have to have Republicans and Democrats agree. And that was the bill that came forward, and so I did support it.
And that's the bonding bill that passed last week in the State House and State Senate. The response from Republican Paul Gazelka. Same question posed to John Peters. John, since you weren't serving at that time, the question is, how would you have voted on this particular bonding bill and why? Your thoughts on the bonding bill, John Peters.
Well, I believe that negotiation between the two groups is very important. I would have voted for this. Definitely. I wish it would have been passed in July, but it wasn't. So we worked. I'm glad that they worked through to do this. There are some personal things I'd like to see added to that, as probably for the infrastructure, getting internet to every home in the state. You know, it's terrible to see kids having to come in and go to Little Falls parking lot to do their homework when they're in a hybrid situation because they can't get internet at home. I had that same problem at my house. That's why I have to come into the office to do most of my work, even on the weekends. So all in all, I think the bonding bill was good, and I'm glad it's going forward, and I would be glad to work with the Republicans on both sides to always come to a good conclusion. Doing nothing is worse than doing something that's not perfect.
Those are the response comments from DFL candidate State Senate District 9, John Peters, and allow the rebuttal, if any. Paul Gazelka, do you have any rebuttal to add to that point?
Yeah, just to add a little bit more. The federal government has been spending trillions lately, and they don't even have to balance the budget. In Minnesota, for stimulus, a bonding bill is something that we can do, and we have to pay for it. And every 20 years, whatever we did 20 years ago falls off, and we don't have to pay for that anymore. And so it revolves. And so that's we do it. But I think it's important that people need to realize when Republicans had the House and Senate 4 years ago, then Speaker Dowd and myself took half the sales tax on auto parts to fund roads and bridges, and we said we're going to use bonding bills to fund the rest because we don't need a gas tax. And that's still the path that I'm on. This time it had $700 million in it for roads and bridges and $300 million for wastewater infrastructure. And lastly, there were a number of projects within that bonding bill that I think were good for our area. Camp Ripley needed to move their military museum, and so we have money for that and for that Camp Ripley's Veteran Trail. We have money for a landfill in Todd County. We have money related to Highway 10 up in Wadena. And then we had money for wastewater infrastructure in Royalton. None of those were projects that I would say were fluff. They were all important for those areas, and that was part of it. And that's what was across all senators' districts is projects like that to help their communities thrive.
That's the rebuttal from Paul Gazelka on the Republican side, and now a rebuttal opportunity on the bonding bill. Any final thoughts on this topic before we move on? DFL candidate John Peters. John?
I think in this case they did a good job on the bonding bill.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, moving on, our next question is going to be directed towards John Peters first and then Paul Gazelka next. This one is in reference to a budget deficit that is looming. Back in February, Minnesota was projected to have a $1.5 billion budget surplus. Largely due to COVID-19 and the resulting economic shutdown, our state is now facing a several billion-dollar budget deficit. If elected, you are the voice of this district. What measures would you plan on supporting to help remedy this budget deficit that is facing us on the horizon? First, the response from DFL candidate John Peters. John?
This is probably one of the toughest questions that either one of us would have to face as we come along here, because there's a lot of good things we need to get done, and some of those things won't get done on there. I do believe that each of the departments in the state of Minnesota should have to reduce their budget by 5 to 10%. I believe the pay freeze, Paul, you'd have to give me the exact number because I don't remember the pay freeze not the pay freeze, but the hiring freeze saved a bunch of money here, but not enough to match that. I think one of our biggest problems is the lack of stimulus from the federal government, which I can't do anything about. I think the total federal response for COVID and for the things has been mismanaged. I don't believe that doing that state by state was wrong. And I believe that if the state got money from the federal government for stimulus, that would help a lot on there. Also, I believe that we got to figure out a way to get money into the poor people's pockets, so that will stimulate spending on there. Because every time money changes hands, it's taxed. So by getting money from the middle class on down into their hands, they spend a greater proportion than the people that have a lot of money on there. So those are just a couple things that have to be done, and it's going to be tough. There's going to be stuff that I really want to see happen that can't happen. So, and I would have to study almost each individual item to decide how much it can be cut and still give benefit to the people of Minnesota.
And that's the response from A. John Peters on the issue of the budget deficit looming in the horizon. Same question now posed to a Republican candidate, State Senate District 9, incumbent Paul Gazelka. Paul, what are your thoughts on the budget deficit looming?
Well, this is going to be the epic challenge next year during session, but we saw this problem in March and April. In April, I asked the governor to cut each agency 5%. That's what we did Back in 2011, each agency said, we know we need to cut 5%, and they found the savings within their agencies. We didn't have to twist their arm to do it. Had they started then, they would have saved $100 million a month, which we will need next year. It's going to be extremely difficult, but that is going to be the direction we have to go. What is the percent of each agency we need to cut to balance the budget? And if it was about raising, if we were a low-tax state, you might be able to make an argument that that would be the solution. But we have, I think, the second highest income tax rates in the country. Our sales taxes are much higher than most. Property taxes are higher. So everywhere you look, our estate taxes are higher. I mean, every tax is high, every fee is high. And so we have to be willing to tighten our belt. I was very disappointed in the end of session that we wanted to give state workers a raise last year but not give them a raise this year. The governor overrode us and gave a raise both years in spite of where we were with our budget. So if you look back to the last time Democrats had House, Senate, and governor, they had a surplus and raised taxes $2 billion. And last year, the governor, with a surplus, wanted to raise taxes $12 billion over 4 years. So what would they do if they were in charge when we have about a $5 billion budget deficit? It's not raising taxes, and it's going to be difficult, but I want to be at the table as we're solving that, and it has to be bipartisan because the governor will be he's the Democrat, and Republicans need to have a seat at the table, too, to make sure that we do this wisely.
And that's the response from Paul Gazelka on the budget deficit looming question. And one more opportunity for rebuttals for both candidates. First, the rebuttal from DFL John Peters. John, anything to add on this question?
Well, I think we will need some moderate tax raises on selected items on there. But it can't be excessive raises. Personally, I like living in Minnesota. I think one of the reasons I like living in Minnesota is because of the government services and the extra things we've had. I've seen what happens in some of the states that have almost no income tax, and I probably wouldn't want to live there. I live here because I love Minnesota the way it is, and I don't want to see taxes raised so that businesses go away, but I do want to make sure that we have enough. And maybe if there would have been some moderate tax raises, our deficit wouldn't have been so bad on there. So that's where I stand.
John Peters on his stance, and then the final rebuttal from Paul Gazelka on this question. Paul, anything to add?
Well, I agree with John that I love Minnesota. I love the people of Minnesota, and they want to make sure that their government functions well. I think if Trump wins the presidential election, I think our economy will bounce back from the difficulties we've been in. That will help a lot. If we're not in a recession and we're trying to balance the budget, it's a lot easier because more money's coming into the state. But if that's not the case, it will be more difficult. But I'm forever optimistic. I always feel like we can find a solution if we're looking for it. In Minnesota, you have to figure out how to work across the aisle, and I think I've proven as a leader that I'm capable of doing that.
Those are the comments from Republican Paul Gazelka, and this next question will be first directed towards Paul and then John the opportunity to answer also. It regards education. At this time, area schools are varying in learning models between in-person, hybrid, or distance learning. The governor started last spring by all schools statewide going distance learning. Since then, his recommendations have changed to allow school districts with the guidance by state and local officials to decide what is best for each individual school district. Little Falls making the choice last night to go to distance learning starting next week on Monday. As a potential voting voice in the state Senate, what is your opinion on how the governor has handled this? Are his guidelines too lenient or too restrictive? Was his decision to have all schools go distance learning right at that time? Why or why not? Also, when speaking on the education, the funding level is more or less needed, maybe the same. The thoughts on all these topics, starting first with Republican incumbent State Senator Paul Gazelka.
Well, first of all, I've already mentioned it once, but I think it is a big mistake to close the schools so that kids can't be in classroom. If they don't want to, if they want to do distance learning, which is 10 to 15% of the student population, they can, or the parents can do homeschooling, or they can choose parochial schools as well, which are busting at the seams as we've been closing the public schools. But the governor's metrics basically is forcing many of these schools to close. American Pediatrics say that you don't need 6 feet social distancing for kids. You can do 3 feet. But we have to measure what are the consequences if kids are not in the classroom, if they're not in sports, if parents aren't at these sports events cheering their kids on. What are the consequences to those kids? And depression rates are sky high. Suicide rates are up. Their educational development, without a doubt, is down. And so across the state, closing the schools the way we are, when only one person under age 20 has died, will likely be the worst mistake the governor has made of all the many mistakes he's made related to COVID-19. I mean, think about when he said bars could have 50 people, but churches could only have 10, and don't sing. I mean, this is another one of those decisions that will have catastrophic consequences for our kids, and you can't get their education back. And so I'm very, very passionate about this. We have to be willing to fight our way through this and have courage to make sure our kids get their education. It's absolutely essential. If Walmart workers are essential, then teachers surely are essential. We've got to get our kids back in the classroom.
Those are the thoughts from Republican Paul Gazelka on education. The same question now posed to DFL candidate State Senate District 9 seat John Peters. John, what are your thoughts on the educational environment at this time?
Well, again, I think it's fairly safe for the primary students to be in class, so that's less of a problem on there unless they have a pre-existing condition or their parent has a pre-existing condition. When secondary and college kids, it's a little bit different. It's more, and again, death is not my primary concern. It's long-term life effects. We have people that are showing symptoms 3 months after they had non-symptomatic COVID on there with the inflammatory disease of their blood vessels. That's showing up now. People with lung problems are showing up 3 to 4 months after they have COVID. So we don't know where we're at with that, and we probably will not know where we're at for about 6 months. So I'm personally a proponent of hybrid. Now, I think we have a big problem with the fact that me being a teacher, I have taught both hybrid and in-class and total learning on there. And hybrid and online learning is much more difficult for the teacher than it is in the classroom. So we threw our teachers right into oblivion last spring when we said, okay, you're going to have to start teaching online with no training. We needed to start training people on how to do this effectively. If we would have done that, we would have done it effectively, would have done that. I also say if everybody would get off their high horse and start wearing a mask and social distance, then we probably would have been able to have done all of our classrooms on there, especially in the rural areas, not necessarily in the cities. I think we need to probably have included more money in our bonding bill so we could clean the schools properly in between each stuff. When I take my wife to therapy for her knee surgery, they are cleaning the desk almost after every time somebody has touched it. I mean, I think we almost need to do that in the classrooms. So long-term effects, distance, the distance learning is stuffing. Paul's probably right that 3 feet is enough for most secondary and elementary and junior high kids.
And that's the response on the education question from John Peters. And once again, offering the rebuttal opportunity. First, the rebuttal from Paul Gazelka, Republican candidate. Paul?
Kids and parents of children, if they want their kids in the classroom, which is about 85%, they need to be in the classroom. That is by far, for most kids, the best way to learn. Not every child. And then if you look at across the state, communities of color, kids of color, they are falling farther behind as a result of hybrid or distance learning. It's not working for them. And so I realize that this is a scary thing to be facing for some people, but when we had the H1N1, it was 60 million people in America were affected. We're not even close to that number, not even close. And we didn't shut anything down. We didn't quarantine the healthy. This time around, if for whatever reason there's been a real fear, and the virus is real, the pandemic is real, but we have to figure out how to navigate and look at the data and look who's at risk and open up the schools. Very, very, very important.
And that's the rebuttal from Republican Paul Gazelka, and now the opportunity, a rebuttal from DFL candidate John Peters. John?
Well, I personally think the comparison between COVID and H1N1 has no scientific basis because of the different vectors of the disease on there. Like I said, H1N1, we knew exactly when people had it. COVID, we don't know for 5-6 days whether they had it, and we may have never know if they've had it. Again, long-term health. That's all I'm worried about, long-term health of our students, because if our health care has to go up exponentially because we have people with scarred lungs, scarred heart, inflamed brain, I think we have to worry about that. I would love to have my kids back in school seeing things. I would love to have that all the kids could have affordable internet so they could do some of the stuff that they do. I would love to have daycare facilities so the parents don't necessarily have to lose their jobs because of all of this to take care of their kids. It's a hardship. You know, hybrid and total distance learning is a hardship on the parents. I really feel for them. I'm not going to ever have to worry about that because of my age. But since Australia did it right, I know about Australia because my daughter lives there. The province she lives in has not had a COVID case in 100 days. They have been able to open their classes because of that. They did a much more stringent lockdown for the whole country than we did there. There's another province there that's having problems because the people would not listen, and you can't put everybody in jail. But if people would listen and do this stuff right, we would be over this by now.
And that's the rebuttal from John Peters. We are going to take a short commercial break. Right now you are listening to the District 9 State Senate Debate/Forum with Republican candidate Paul Gazelka and DFL candidate John Peters. We'll have more, including the closing thoughts, on the way. You're listening to the District 9 Debate Forum here on AM960 KLTF Up Front.
Weather update brought to you by Broadway Hair, downtown Little Falls, where they offer cuts, colors, wax, perms, and beard trims. Call today. Schedule an appointment. 320-414-1100. Open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Saturday, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. And walk-ins are welcome. It's Broadway Hair across from the bakery in downtown Little Falls.
A winter weather advisory is in effect for the forecast area. We'll see periods of snow showers here for this afternoon with total daytime accumulation of 3 to 5 inches possible. Cloudy skies with temperatures holding rather steady. Winds out of the southeast of 5 to 15 miles per hour. Then for tonight, a chance for some snow and freezing drizzle mixing at times. Cloudy sky conditions and a low around 30. By Wednesday, mostly cloudy, high at 35. I'm meteorologist Jennifer Wojcicki for AM960 KLTF Little Falls. Currently, it's 30.
Hello, this is Jeff Check, the owner of Check Auto Body and Towing of Pierce. Did you know we specialize in all automotive glass replacement? We offer professional service and installation on all makes and models. Whether you have a small chip or a tiny crack, either can be a serious matter that leads to weakness of glass or poorer visibility. Give us a call today and start your glass replacement. Look us up on the web or Facebook. Check Auto Body and Towing, Morrison County's largest body shop. Come check us out.
It's hunting season once again. Set your sights on Bermel Shoes in Randall for your footwear needs. We carry boots with the scent band technology to help eliminate odor and a rubber outsole with multi-tread lug traction for uneven terrain. Let us help you bag the big one. Bermel Shoes in Randall, the little store that's big on boots and so much more.
Saturday mornings now at 8:30. It's our weekly high school sports wrap. It's a look back to scores and highlights from this past week. Al catches up with the area coaches to find out what's happening in high school sports. It's our weekly sports wrap, Saturdays at 8:30 on KLTF.
AM960 KLTF. Right now you're listening to the District 9 State Senate Debate/Forum, a special unique program on today's Upfront. Republican incumbent Paul Gazelka and DFL challenger John Peters on the phones today. We're going to allow both candidates the opportunity for closing statements, but we should be able to sneak in one more question. Maybe not time for rebuttal on this. Just be aware, candidates. In this first one, first answered by John Peters, the DFL candidate. John, technology always seems to be advancing. In the most rural areas in Minnesota, they appear to be behind the more urban communities in the state in technology available in reference to high-speed internet. If elected to the Senate, what measures would you support in rural broadband and or the next step that appears to be at this time 5G? On technology side, what are your thoughts, John Peters?
Well, it's very important that we do some type of bonding bill. We need to do something like the rural electric REA thing to get internet to every home. It's probably going to have to be done through bonding, so we could lay the fiber and lay the cable that we need. As far as 5G is concerned, I'm a technologist. I happen to know that if we want to get true 5G, we need 5 to 10 towers for each tower that we have right now. I don't know how feasible that is in the short term. I think it would be less costly to lay fiber, and then especially along the long routes, and then lay cables to branches on there, so we can get at least acceptable. So you can do a Zoom meeting on there. So. Most hotspots software is unreliable, drops in, drops out. You can't have 3 kids doing homework at the same time. So we need to do something with that. We need to find funding somehow. Given our budget crunch, it's going to have to be showing some very a large amount of ingenuity to figure out how to fund something like that. And it's something that, since I am a technologist, I would take very seriously if I were elected.
And those are the thoughts from John Peters. And the same question now directed towards Republican Paul Gazelka. Paul, when it comes to technology moving forward, what would you support and why?
Well, first of all, totally agree with John on that. We have been putting tens and tens of millions towards advancing broadband every year. And even the rural electric comment, I'm exactly on the same page. So COVID has really highlighted the fact that we have to get up to speed there. I do want to shift gears because there was no questions on defunding the police, and it's one of the biggest differences between the Democrat-controlled House and the Senate, controlled by Republicans. So I want to make sure that people are aware that Republicans stand strong to never defund or dismantle the police. Unlike, for example, the entire city council in Minneapolis wants to defund the police, Congressman Omar wants to defund the police, and there really is no chastisement of those groups from leading Republicans like the governor or the Speaker of the House. And so that is a huge difference between the two parties, and as a result, the Minnesota Police Officers Association has almost completely endorsed Republicans, just a handful of Democrats, because they know that the difference in direction that each party is going is dramatically different. And I will tell you that the local sheriffs up here contacted me as I was managing through that crisis, thanking us for protecting the people that are protecting us.
And those are the thoughts from Republican Paul Gazelka. And at this time, we're going to make sure that both you as candidates have the opportunity for closing statements. We decided via a coin flip a little earlier before the start of the program that the order would go first to John Peters and then Paul Gazelka second with the closing statements. So the opportunity now for the District 9 State Senate Debate/Forum closing comments from DFL candidate John Peters. John?
Well, I'm disappointed that I can't respond to the defund the police question because I've actually gotten more information since I last talked to Paul about this.
I tell you what, if you want, take about a minute on that too.
Huh?
If you want, take about a minute on that too.
Well, okay. Basically, I've talked to a few of the city things, and I asked them the direct question, what is their model for defunding the police? And they all said the Camden model. Camden was a cesspool of crime in the early 60s, especially after Governor Christie reduced the stuff. What they did then was defranchised the police. They kept them going. They started moving the jobs over to the county police on there, and started taking some of the city money and putting it in, getting rid of the 1,500 or 1,500 bad buildings in there, started getting rid of the games. So when they said to defund the police, they put more money into the society, they put more money into the county police, they ended up putting up more cameras and all that, and that essentially, after an initial rise in crime, as they were doing it, most of the police, by the way, were rehired by the county, and they ended up with more policemen than they had before. They had more community support than they had before, and they reduced crime to almost one-half to what it was before there. Now, for my closing remarks. Okay, when I started this campaign, I knew I was probably the biggest underdog in the state. Senator Gazelka is a formidable and knowledgeable opponent. I do not know if I've improved my chances or not, but if I save one life to keep young people from having long-term health issues, I will consider this campaign a success. I feel that the people that feel wearing a mask and wearing a mask and social distancing is a hardship. They are irresponsible and negligent. People's scarred lung tissue, scarred heart tissue, and inflamed brain tissue is not a desirable outcome. Yes, children need to have personal contact in school, but we must make it safe for the students, the teachers, and the families of each. Pretending it will miraculously go away will not work. Thank you for your time, and I'd really like to have your vote or at least support on wearing your masks and social distancing.
Kind of a rebuttal and also closing statements there from DFL candidate John Peters, and now the same opportunity. The rebuttal rolled in with the closing comments from Republican incumbent Paul Gazelka. Paul?
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly on the police, the Camden model really focuses on community policing. That is a good model as far as community policing. That is not where Minneapolis is. I mean, when you have more than 60 of their police officers have quit or retired early because they have very little appreciation for what they do. And it's a very different thing that's going on in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so that's why I say, well, follow where the police, who they're endorsing, and that'll give you some clue about who is saying what and what's true. So as far as this election, first of all, very grateful to have served 10 years. I think if I wasn't the leader of the Senate, I would probably be passing the baton right now. I think that's how it should work, that you serve for a certain amount of time and then pass the baton. But I'm going to focus next year on three things: safety and unrest. You know, there's constant violent protests. We've got to rein that in. We've got to stop the attitude of defunding the police. Number two, we got to get Minnesota back on track. That means kids in school safely, businesses up and running safely, no more lockdowns. World Health Organization says that's a terrible thing to do, and the governor needs to work with the legislators, which means we remove the emergency powers. And third, we're going to have to tackle the state budget crisis. It will be difficult. I have the experience to do that. Finally, let me say that I've been endorsed by the people that you trust, the NFIB and the Chamber of Commerce for businesses, 49ers, Carpenters Union, Pipe Trades, and more for the trades, Minnesota Police Officers Association. MCCL is the leading advocate for pro-life. They endorse me. The NRA and GOPRA are the leading groups for protecting the Second Amendment. They endorse me. Farm Bureau for farm issues endorse me. And so the groups you trust and endorse me. So let me return and finish my job there and help get Minnesota back on track.
Those are the closing statements from Republican incumbent Paul Gazelka. Today's State Senate District 9 debate/forum. We will post it on our website underneath the upfront page at fallsradio.com. We expect it uploaded by tomorrow morning. From the radio station standpoint, a thank you to both candidates, Paul Gazelka and John Peters, for joining us this morning. Thank you very much, both to you gentlemen.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.
AM960 KLTF, Little Falls.